So I gotta start off today's video with a bit of an apology, and the reason I want to apologize is because a bunch of people have been sending me messages ever since I was on vacation in Ireland, and those messages have contained things like Ana Kasparian is promoting anti-Jewish or anti-Israeli conspiracies, and honestly, as somebody who is well aware of the fact that Ana Kasparian over at the Young Turks is very anti-Israel, I just assumed that the thing was happening that almost always happens in relation to this topic, where Ana was just being crazy anti-Israel, but in no way, shape, or form was she actually pushing anti-Israel or anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. And this is because, let's be real, a lot of times critics of Israel are labeled immediately with the label of anti-Semitism, even though that's not necessarily applicable. And I had said on this channel multiple times that a lot of the leftists who are anti-Israel are not necessarily anti-Jewish, they're just like anti-Western, skeptical of American foreign policy, and they view Israel as an outpost of the West. They also view it as an oppressor dynamic, so that's not really fairly attributed to anti-Semitism in my opinion. So I never really looked into any of this stuff. I never really actually decided to watch any of the clips, and honestly, since I've been back from Ireland, I really haven't had the time to watch any Young Turks content. But fast forward to recently, when friend of the channel Devin Tracy was actually telling me about this in private conversation, sending me the clips, I realized that Ana Kasparian is in fact promoting insane anti-Israel / anti-Jewish conspiracies, including but not limited to Israel did 9/11, and of course John F. Kennedy was killed by the Israelis. Now I'm going to explain the psychology on why I think Ana is promoting this, and I'm also going to delve into these conspiracies because unlike many people viewing this for the first time, I've actually been in like that 9/11 truth zone at a point in my life when I was like 19 years old. I've seen all the documentaries. I know where this stuff originates from. I know the debunks to all this stuff, and I can tell when somebody is just like doing intro to 9/11 truth and they don't even have the conspiracies right, much less have done the research to find out that half the nonsense they're promoting is just that nonsense. Editor's note: during the course of the production of this video, after I shot large swaths of it, it was recommended to me by a mutual, I guess, that I either reach out to Ana Kasparian directly or indirectly in order to get some answers to some of the questions that I had throughout the course of this video. And in fact, this is exactly what I did. So whenever you see me pop up in this Bizarro shirt, guess what? That is me giving you the answers, or the lack thereof, of certain questions that were passed through the grapevine onto Miss Kasparian, and the answers that were or were not passed back. So stay tuned for that. So this is what we're going to talk about today. Ana Kasparian going off the deep end, taking the conspiracy pill, if you'll call it. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join. Oh, and also, you can find Devin Tracy over at Censor TV, use promo code RU, or on Subscribestar. Link will be in the description if you want to watch his content. So a large part of what I'm going to be talking about today comes from this Young Turks video, which will be linked in full in the description for you to check out for yourself. And it is entitled Pro-Israel Group Forms Campaign to Get Ana Demonetized.
So Stop Anti-Semitism, which is, I believe, the same group that clownishly went after Jennifer Gardner's little girl because she was wearing a shirt that had a watermelon design on it, okay? They're the same folks that are now coming after me. And so they posted something that I need to obviously refute because it's a lie.
Now, Ana states that the purpose of this video is to debunk 5 claims from an organization that is accusing her of anti-Semitism. She lays out these 5 claims, but interestingly enough, she doesn't really refute all of these claims, or even most of them. Like the first one, which they make the claim that Ana was saying that the Jews control the government, she does contest. She says Israel controls the government, and I can kind of let that one go because the whole thing over at the Young Turks is that money influences politics and gives them control. So like they're just labeling Israel a lobby, you could argue, and since they do have a lot of influence in both parties, this is what she's trying to say in order to give her the most generous reading of that. But then she goes on to the topic of Israelis celebrating 9/11, and that is when the butchery starts. And what I'm talking about is the butchery of facts and logic.
When it comes to Israelis celebrating 9/11, I remember Netanyahu on 2 different occasions said some positive things about what happened on 9/11 for the Israelis, of course. Let's go to graphic 4. As tonight, this was, by the way, New York Times, published September 12th, 2001. As tonight, what the attack meant for relations between the United States and Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, the former prime minister, replied, "It's very good." Oof. Then he edited himself. Well, not very good, but it will generate immediate sympathy, meaning sympathy for Israel. That's what he was worried about. That's what he was thinking about, sympathy for Israel.
So they could murder more Muslims, take more of their land.
He predicted that the attack would strengthen the bond between our two peoples because we've experienced terror over so many decades, but the United States has now experienced a massive hemorrhaging of terror.
He sounds thrilled.
So look, I understand that many of people out there in my audience are not fans of Benjamin Netanyahu. Honestly, I could care less for the guy. He's a foreign leader, have absolutely no interest in him. And I do think they're probably better people that could be the prime minister of Israel that, if I was more invested, I would push for to take power over there. That being said, what Ana Kasparian and Cenk Uygur do with this quote right here is absolutely the worst reading that is contradicted by the very graphic they put up. And it's disgusting, and it shows you that they're just right there ready to smear because they're that angry at Israel that they're willing to do anything, including lie, including misrepresent, in order to accomplish their goal. And conversely, I'm trying to give Ana and the Young Turks the best reading of this situation because I want to actually give the steel man argument, but obviously they're not doing that. And what I mean by this graphic portrays them is that you can see from the top of this graphic, he was specifically asked what this attack means for US-Israeli relations. And in response to that specific question about the attack's impact on US-Israeli relations, he said it's very good. Then, realizing that that sounds rather insensitive after 3,000 Americans were just murdered in a massive attack, he then tries to edit himself in fear of people taking him out of context. But guess what? 24 years later, the Young Turks are going to put this graphic up on screen, let you know in the graphic that he was being specifically prompted about what the impact was on US-Israeli relations, and then talk about how he had so much joy in the attack, and for some reason, for some unknown purpose, he tried to make it about Israel. I mean, he was asked specifically as the prime minister of Israel what impact this attack would have on relations between the United States and Israel, but for some unknown reason, according to Ana Kasparian and the Young Turks, he made it about the Israelis. How disgusting, how horrible. Benjamin Netanyahu celebrated the attack. What an absolute scumbag. This is the coverage that we're getting from the Young Turks. And again, it's asinine and ridiculous. And you can hate Benjamin Netanyahu. You could think he has too much influence on our government. You can despise what he's doing in Gaza if you want. Hold all those positions. But the fact is, this is a lie, a blatant lie. You can see it on screen for yourself. And yet, smugly, they just go after it because, again, they're about pushing the conspiracies and connecting Israel to 9/11, and it's going to get significantly worse than this going forward.
In 2008, Netanyahu was quoted by the Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv as having told an audience at a university that the 9/11 attacks had been beneficial for Israel. Quote, "We are benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq."
I mean, he just says it, right?
He says it out loud.
So
what's up with that anti-Semitism? Like, you're gonna come at me for stating the truth?
So this is a real throwback to the Young Turks, where they put up a quote on screen, they speculate wildly about the meaning of said quote, but they never actually inform you of the fact that they only put up a portion of the quote. Because yes, absolutely, Benjamin Netanyahu 100% said that. However, they left out the part where he said, "These events swung American public opinion in our favor."
Right?
He says it out loud.
So
what's up with that anti-Semitism?
Now look, the anti-Semitism organization is very likely biased towards Israel, so you could take that into account of your analysis of their claims against Ana Kasparian. But the reason people are coming after you, what's up with that, if you will, Ana, is that you're lying. You left out the most crucial part of the quote that each and every one of these outlets, including the one you cited, made sure to include, which was Benjamin Netanyahu was referring to American public opinion. That's how Israel benefited from these situations. And the reason you're cutting that out is because you want to give the implication that Benjamin Netanyahu is celebrating the attacks, not again referring to American public opinion post the attacks. This is like saying that Glenn Beck, who used to do like the 9/12 project, talking about all the unity in the country the day after 9/11, was somehow saying that the attacks of 9/11 were good because he was trying to recreate the post 9/11 unity. It is obviously dishonest. You know exactly what you're doing. It's very difficult to find an article that even reprints this, that doesn't have this information, but who knows? Maybe Ana is embracing far more dubious sources than you can imagine, or maybe she's just pulling this stuff from social media. Again, I leave that up to you guys out there in the audience, but it is clear what he was referring to. You still can dislike the quote if you want, but to pretend that he was celebrating the attacks when he wasn't is just factually untrue.
So
what's up with that anti-Semitism?
That is what is up with that, Ana. That's what I was saying.
They keep talking about, oh, Anna's spreading these conspiracy theories. All these conspiracy theories about, what was it? Here we go. Said Israelis celebrated 9/11. Okay, now what did I mean by that? Look, you can't blame me when ABC News speaks to an American witness who saw what she saw on 9/11. Here's the report.
It began when this woman was watching the Twin Towers burning from her apartment in New Jersey. She noticed 3 men on top of a van, posing for pictures with the towers burning in the background.
And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
The witness called police, who stopped the van hours later and arrested 5 men. All 5, it turns out, were Israeli. They were turned over to the FBI. Sources tell ABC News during a check of national security databases, some of the men were listed as having had connections with Israeli intelligence. At the FBI, that set off alarm bells.
Never in my wildest imagination did I think that we would get to the day where Ana Kasparian of the Young Turks is pushing the 5 dancing Israelis conspiracy theory, yet here we are. This is not an AI-generated video. This is a real thing. Let me dig up that Ana, it's real, guys, it's real clip.
It's real, guys, it's real.
And honestly, I will apologize to all you guys that I ignored that were sending me this video, because I just assumed this was an organization that was angry at Ana over her Israel stance, that was trying to attach the label of anti-Semitism to her, and it wasn't really gonna hold water. Now, of course, Ana then repeats another portion of the conspiracy that I think is hilarious.
Now, the 5 Israelis who, according to that witness, were seen celebrating as they were taking photos of the Twin Towers burning, later were released back to Israel. They were interviewed during a talk show, and one of them said, look, we were just there to document the events.
Now, honestly, I want to thank Ana Kasparian, because she's making me feel like I'm 22 years old all over again, reintroducing all these 9/11 conspiracies that I discovered for the first time over a decade ago. Because what she just said right there about how they said they were there to document the events, super sketchy, super conspiracy oriented, and it's something that we definitely have to worry about, because they said on a talk show they were there to document the events. And you know, how would they know that the events were happening unless they had prior knowledge of the 9/11 attacks? I mean, again, how would these people know to be there to document the events before the events happen, which is definitely 100% what was said on the talk show? Because if it's not what was said on the talk show, Ana would come off like a ridiculous loon right here.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
So the clip in question that I just played for you right there is actually still available on YouTube.com, although I will give you guys a caveat. The account that I found it on is quite sketchy, in that they basically open the clip with text that looks like it was made in Microsoft Movie Maker that references the protocols of the Elders of Zion, to give you an idea of where this is coming from. That being said, what we actually got on that talk show is a translated version, and if you want to believe that translation, you totally can. If you want to question it, it's fine, where he responds to a question of why were you there? And he says, according to that translation, they were there to document the events.
Our purpose was to document the event.
And honestly, that's a smoking gun. Good enough for me. It was all right there in that translation. Nothing more needs to be said about this. Israel did 9/11. They had prior knowledge of it. Whatever Ana Kasparian is saying right there, 100% dead on accurate. And I owe her an apology for daring to question the deep research that she did into that. So I guess this is where I'm going to leave the video. That's all I really have for you guys today. But there is one thing that I might want to bring up that may contradict that, which is, if they interpreted the question as why were you there, as in why were you at that spot filming the events, and they said to document the events as in like they were filming, so that's what they were doing there at that moment in time with their video cameras, like, you know, thousands of other people did on 9/11, then maybe this is wildly misinterpreted. Maybe Ana and Cenk are deliberately misinterpreting the why were you there question, or the why we were there answer, as them saying why they were in New Jersey or why they showed up to that specific spot, rather than what they were doing. It's not as if we haven't seen instances where something gets translated from another language to English and the translation is not quite one-to-one exactly how it would be said in an American dialect. I mean, very famously in the Amanda Knox case, one of the reasons why they were convinced that she was meeting up with her employer in order to plan and plot the killing of Meredith was because she texted her employer, "See you later," when he told her that she didn't have to work that evening. And that "see you later," even though we interpret that in English, in American English, as a goodbye, was not read that way by the Italians, because when it's translated, it comes off more as "we have plans later." Now, the reason I bring up the translation issue right there is because it's, for me, a little bit crazy that Ana and Cenk are going off on this wild speculation that the Israelis had prior knowledge to the September 11th attacks based on a news interview that these individuals did on Israeli TV that is clearly open to interpretation. Again, if they took that question to mean, what were you guys doing there when that lady saw you, and they were saying we're documenting the event like thousands of other people did with their cameras after the towers were hit, that's not unusual at all. That is not prior knowledge. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's the reaction that a bunch of people had, by the way, including that woman who was using her binoculars to observe the event at the time. But the Young Turks don't have that standard because it's Israel, therefore smear, smear, smear.
By the way, the moving truck, they claimed that they were working for a moving company. It was a shell organization with ties to Israel. It wasn't an actual moving company. Inside the moving truck were all sorts of passports, all sorts of recording devices, all sorts of strange materials.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what I was referring to when I was talking about the celebrating Israelis. Those 5 men were Israelis, and according to that witness, they were seen celebrating. They seemed jovial as the United States was suffering one of the actually the worst terrorist attack in American history.
Yeah, so I want to tackle the video and then the overall charges.
So Ana says that according to this witness, they were celebrating and they seemed jovial. And again, this sounds really bad if you're operating based on the emotional part of your brain rather than the logical part of your brain. Because remember, people are making the case that these are intelligence officers from the nation of Israel that were sent in advance with prior knowledge to 9/11 to document the events of 9/11. However, they made such a ruckus, it was so notable that a woman from an apartment that was pretty far away ended up calling the police on them because she found it to be incredibly suspicious, which begs the question, if you're an intelligence officer sent to document a terror attack that you have prior knowledge of in a foreign country, why would you be making such a ruckus to draw so much attention to yourselves that would basically blow the operation? Why not rent an apartment that has a view, surveil from inside, and document the event if that was your objective? And reportedly, according to many people at the FBI, what these guys were doing, and they were young guys, was essentially doing like a force perspective thing where they would hold up a lighter and have the buildings burning behind them, and when you actually have the camera lined up in a certain way, it would look like they were setting the building on fire. Again, this is a bad reaction. Obviously, in hindsight, this is disgusting, but this sounds much more like somebody in their 20s who sees something that is shocking and they're in awe of it, and them reacting in a dumb way in the moment, rather than a sophisticated intelligence operation where the absolute most key part of said intelligence operation would be not drawing attention to yourself.
Those 5 men were Israelis, and according to that witness, they were seen celebrating. They seemed jovial as the United States was suffering one of the worst terrorist attack in American history.
Ironically, this statement right here that's meant to elicit an emotional reaction to you is actually something that contradicts what you would expect based on her previous statement. But you see, this isn't about logic. This is 100% about emotion and, of course, about projection, because Anna's first iteration of posting this particular clip on the internet.com appears to be in response to somebody posting a video of Palestinians in the West Bank unambiguously celebrating the September 11th attacks after it was 100% clear to everybody around the world that it was in fact a terrorist attack.
Dan, that we're going to show you from the West Bank. These are Palestinian celebrations in the wake of Tuesday's terror attacks in the United States. Apparently, Palestinians took to the street chanting, "God is great." People were throwing candy, distributing candy to passersby. The U.S. government obviously has become increasingly unpopular, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, because Palestinians feel that the U.S. government has sided with Israel. One man, Nawal Abdel Fattah, wearing a long black dress, threw sweets in the air saying, actually that's a woman, pardon me, saying she was happy because, quote, America is the head of the snake. America always stands by Israel in its war against us.
So Anna's like, oh, large celebrations in the streets of the 9/11 attacks in a Palestinian territory. I can't really refute that. I can't address that in any meaningful way. So let me dig up this conspiracy about the Jews celebrating 9/11, Israelis in particular, so I can also then lead that into maybe they had prior knowledge, which of course eventually leads into maybe they're the ones who did 9/11 when you really think about it. And to be clear, I'm actually not a fan of showing that clip of people in the West Bank doing that celebration, because while it absolutely happened, and yes, that population is in broad support of terror attacks, not just in Israel, but in the United States of America, I find it to be kind of dehumanizing to appeal to people's emotion in that way, because in reality, a lot of people get the takeaway from them celebrating that their lives don't matter and it's okay to brutalize them and whatnot, and that's not a message I would ever want to communicate out into my audience. What we have to realize about folks in the Palestinian territory is that they are among the most radicalized people on the entire planet, and for a lot of them, their hatred of the United States of America is merely just an extension of their hatred of Israel. So, like, yeah, I would not normally want to play that clip for you, because while it did happen, while it's 100% the motivation why Anna is pushing this conspiracy, it really kind of like goes out into the world and it gets people to a dark place that I'm not comfortable promoting. But Anna, no such hesitation when it comes to the Israelis.
So first, about the video, people get really emotional about it and they get so, oh, that's so very wrong. You're not allowed to show an ABC News video. You're not allowed to show a Fox News video. They did exhaustive, actually back when they did investigative reporting about this as well. And so it turns out we captured a lot of Israeli spies after 9/11. And you're not going to be shocked to find out what happened next. We let them all go.
We let them go.
Now look, to Cenk's point about people getting offended at the idea that you're showing this video or talking about this story, people who are offended that you even bring this up, those are absurd individuals. However, what Cenk's doing is not just asking questions or just showing you the video, he is drawing wild conclusions, as is Anna, based on parts of this local news segment, which, by the way, they didn't bother to show you the end, which is that they ended up finding out that they had no prior knowledge to the 9/11 attacks.
In jail, the 5 Israelis were repeatedly interrogated and given lie detector tests. Stephen Gordon was their American lawyer.
They were asked questions if they had ever been approached by or hired by any non-United States intelligence community.
While there is still some debate among American intelligence officials, many investigators believe some of the men were part of an Israeli operation aimed at monitoring radical Islamic charities that support groups like Hamas, something lawyers for the 5 men and the Israeli government strongly deny.
These 5 Israelis were not involved in any intelligence operation in the United States. The story is simply false.
In the end, the FBI concluded there was no evidence that any of the 5 men had advance knowledge of the September 11th plot. After 71 days, the 5 Israelis were deported, leaving some ruffled feathers among both U.S. and Israeli officials.
So whatever reason, try to figure this out for yourselves. The Young Turks shows you the beginning of the segment, the innuendo, but never actually shows you the conclusion of said segment. But in addition to that, Cenk also asserts that they arrested a lot of Israeli spies after 9/11, and yeah, I'm sure this is true. In fact, they arrested a lot of people, detained a lot of people of all different nationalities after 9/11, hundreds of people at least. The ACLU actually did a report on the lengthy detention of all these different individuals from all these different nationalities, but these people never get brought up because, again, there's nothing in it to do conspiracies about Turkish nationals that were detained and held for months under suspicion of some kind of a connection or something of the sort. There's nothing in it when you're doing that for other Arab countries, unless, of course, it's Saudi Arabia, which people have talked a lot about, members of the bin Laden family being detained and being allowed to leave the United States of America, and there has been kind of fleshed out conspiracies about that, to be 100% fair. But yeah, Cenk isn't talking about any of those other ones. He's focusing on these Israelis, and again, he's implying that they had prior knowledge, using an ABC segment to support that, but the ABC segment states clearly they didn't have prior knowledge. If the first half of the AB segment is good for the goose, the second half should be good for the gander.
And so it turns out we captured a lot of Israeli spies after 9/11, and you're not going to be shocked to find out what happened next. We let them all go.
We let them go.
We let them go back to Israel. So those are indisputable facts, and you can look them up.
Also, it is now time to point out that Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks actually produced a segment years ago about Ted Nugent liking comments on Facebook that implied Israel had prior knowledge and or was involved in 9/11, and he called those likes by Ted Nugent that he thought were so significant he was going to do a whole story on a blatant anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic conspiracy. And in fact, he said that doing this kind of thing opens the door up for all these different anti-Semitic things to come out into the forefront.
In what might constitute further evidence of what Cenk calls the unraveling, or just might be evidence of the further unraveling of Ted Nugent's weak mind at this point, he recently has been liking comments on Facebook that indicate support for the idea that Israel was responsible for 9/11. Let's bring up this first image. Seeing there, the like on the actual first comment, that is actually from Ted Nugent. Israeli Mossad was responsible for the 9/11 attack. Why are we still protecting the Zionists who also control our media? Podcasts are fine, but you should have a bigger forum.
It's not to go on the warpath against Ted Nugent, which I've done plenty and he's deserved plenty. And I get it. You look at this and you go, well, that's a small thing he's liking. And maybe he didn't understand what he was liking, etc.
He's a moron.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So, but the reason I bring this up, and I find this story interesting and disturbing, is we're lifting the lid off the Pandora's box, right? So it started with, it started a long time ago, but in this latest cycle, Trump comes in, guns blazing against Mexicans. They're rapists, they're criminals. I guess there's some good ones, right? Then he moves on, and Ben Carson moves on, and others move on to Muslims. And so there's a problem in this country. It is the Muslims, right? And that's literally what a person said to Donald Trump, and he generally agreed, and then he doubled down on it the next day. And culture comes in with the talk of the f***ing Jews, right? And so then that puts you back a little bit, like, wow, it shouldn't be any worse than the attack against Mexicans, African Americans, Muslims, etc. But it's so taboo in this country that when she does it and there is not an enormous reaction, it feels scarier.
Yeah.
Like oh my God, we just went there, right? So now Nugent, if this is true and he follows up with like, hey, maybe the Israelis, right? So because when you peel that lid off and you open up Pandora's box, one of the things that flies out is always anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
All across the world, all across history, right?
So for Cenk to pretend that he doesn't understand why people would think it's kind of anti-Semitic to do the Israel did 9/11 thing, when 9 years ago Ted Nugent even liking Facebook comments was enough for him to do a whole video about how anti-Semitic it is absurd and ridiculous. But again, the hypocrisy that we can expect from him. And again, he talked about how it unleashes all of these problems. He really made a point in this segment to talk about how inappropriate it is.
You can see that they're getting emboldened, and you can see their courage rising. They're like, it's like the uncle who Now he doesn't need 3 drinks to start saying something racist at dinner. Now he starts as everybody's sitting down at the table. Like, you don't want that. You want it to require something extra for them to reveal how dark they actually are.
Yeah, now people encourage them with talk of like, oh, Ben Carson's just a truth teller. Yeah. Donald Trump's just a truth teller. You know, these guys, when they attack this race or this religion, they're just telling the truth, man. They're the only ones with courage. So these guys then think, oh, I got more courage where that came from. I hate the Jews too.
Yeah.
How's that for courage?
If you like Trump, you're going to love me.
Right? So, and I'm telling you, man, and once anti-Semitism leaps out, it's an enormous problem in and of itself. It also encourages everything else. That means there's no bottom
What's
left.
off limits?
What's off limits? There's nothing off limits. So dark forces have been unleashed in the world.
Fast forward a couple of years, Ana Kasparian isn't just liking those posts, she is directly repeating this conspiracy whack jobbery, and Cenk Uygur totally on board with it. Cenk Uygur now supporting her, cheering her on.
By the way, the moving truck, they claimed that they were working for a moving company. It was a shell organization with ties to Israel. It wasn't an actual moving company. Inside the moving truck were all sorts of passports, all sorts of recording devices, all sorts of strange materials.
Also, the claim that they had a bunch of suspicious things on them in the van at the time that they were pulled over by the police is ridiculous and absurd. And Anna's example of passports and whatever does not hold up to scrutiny. First and foremost, anybody who's ever traveled outside of their home country knows for a fact that you are told to keep your passport on you at all times. It is a universal ID. Also, in addition to that, passports are also stolen. And considering these were Israelis, they had to come into the country with some kind of documentation. Them having passports on them is not suspicious at all whatsoever. In addition to that, one of the things that sounds really suspicious when you realize it's September 11th, but actually isn't, was the fact that they had box cutters on them, which again is evocative of the way that the hijackers took over the planes, but they were in a moving van where box cutters would be expected to be found because they're standard moving equipment. So no, Anna, your innuendo that passports and other suspicious things in the moving van doesn't stand up to scrutiny because, again, you would expect box cutters to be found in a moving van, and you would expect non-citizens to have passports on them. That's their identification. Now, in addition to the fact that I will link the original documents so you can check this out for yourself, these Israelis actually did an interview with Gray Zone a couple years back, so even though their names and a lot of the information in the documents is heavily redacted, we can actually figure out who is who when you compare and contrast this interview to, of course, the FBI documents. And what you find out is that the suspicious things they thought about the passports were that one of the individuals actually had 2 passports. However, this was explained by this individual being a dual citizen between Germany and Israel. In addition to that, you also had reports of flight records that were in the vehicle at the time. However, this was explained by the fact that one of these Israelis had a vacation that departed for India the very next day. In addition to that, a camera was gifted to this individual for his trip to India by his brother. And by the way, the feds were able to corroborate his itinerary in India for this vacation, which is one of the reasons why they dismissed suspicion against him. Now, another one of these Israelis also had about $4,700 worth of cash that was on his person. Again, suspicious. However, he explained to the feds that there was a break-in at his apartment and he wanted to keep his money on him. And yeah, certain foreign cultures like to carry cash on them. So even though this is pretty damn suspicious, don't get me wrong, the fact is they were able to verify the report of the break-in that he was talking about. In addition to that, and this is absolutely crucial, there was one individual of the 5, this guy called Kurtzberg, who by the way also had a camera of his own, who was the person that was the most suspicious to the feds, who they believed was actually a guy that might be Israeli intelligence because he had a diplomatic passport. Now, you have to understand that the Israelis have mandatory service. So every Israeli, except for those with religious exemptions, has to serve in the IDF. And every one of these individuals was questioned about their military record, and every single one of them answered those questions except for Kurtzberg. Again, this is why when you read the documents, it is absolutely clear that the person they think is intelligence the most is Kurtzberg. However, eventually, after weeks of interrogation, he ultimately ended up submitting to 2 polygraph tests, which again, I'm not the biggest believer in polygraph tests, but again, if you look at the documents, even though the feds still had their suspicions, this was enough at the time in order for them to grant their release. Also, and I think this is important for everybody to take note of, is that the FBI never referred to these individuals as dancing Israelis, and in fact, none of the witnesses, including Maria, the one that Ana Kasparian is highlighting the most, referred to them as dancing Israelis. They were described as high-fivers because, according to Maria, she said that they appeared to be jovial in that they smiled, hugged one another, and gave high fives. In a second interview, she described the behavior as horsing around. In a third interview, days later, she described the men as appearing to be happy and joking around. The first account of dancing Israelis actually comes from Mohammed Atta's father in an interview he did on September 28th, where he was trying to deflect blame away from his son.
So my question is, if those folks, the 5 spies in that particular story, were confirmed as spies, and they were, why did we release them? That's super strange, isn't it? Normally when a country catches a spy, they never release them. You might do a spy exchange, you might kill the spy, you might keep the spy in jail forever for the rest of their lives, but you never return them for no reason back to their home country, unless that country is controlling your country.
So Cenk just smuggles the premise in it that these 5 were later confirmed to be spies, but this is also not true. In fact, it is still pretty much contested between the United States and Israel, because the United States speculates that these 5 Israelis were likely a part of a clandestine intelligence operation to surveil charities that they believed were doing funding to Hamas.
According to federal officials, the 5 men have been barred from returning to the United States for 10 years, they say because they violated immigration laws.
Bottom line, John, is there any evidence any of these 5 men knew about the September 11th attacks before they occurred?
The FBI spent a great deal of time examining this question. It does not appear that they were in place taking pictures before the planes hit, but shortly thereafter. And they say they haven't uncovered evidence that any of these 5 men, and they did their backgrounds, they searched apartments, they telephone records and so on, had any advanced knowledge of the attack.
And while the FBI or certain sources might believe that in fact they were Israeli intelligence, they don't believe that the US was a target, that they were actually investigating Muslim groups?
They believe if this was an intelligence operation by Israel, that it was focused on the Islamic groups and charities that raise money for groups that are considered by US law enforcement and others terrorist groups. And you'll note that after September 11th, the US moved on many of these groups with indictments, arrests, raids on their headquarters, something that hadn't happened prior to this.
These are groups that Israel believes have been funding Hamas and other terrorist organizations.
Groups that are responsible for most of the suicide bombings there.
But in reality, that is just that, speculation. It was never confirmed. Cenk just made that up. And again, it appears that they're pulling from a document that essentially took the government's release and kind of repackaged it in a certain way to make it look like that, inserted some innuendos and some summaries rather than the actual government document.
Why did we release them? That's super strange, isn't it? Normally when a country catches a spy, they never release them. You might do a spy exchange, you might kill the spy, you might keep the spy in jail forever for the rest of their lives, but you never return them for no reason back to their home country, unless that country is controlling your country.
So one of the things that Cenk is doing right here, and by the way, it could be deliberately so, in fact, I do believe it is deliberately so, is misleading his audience on what happens typically when a spy is caught in your country. Now, if you find them stealing secrets or something of the sort, then they will be charged with a crime, and if they're convicted of the crime, at least in the United States of America, they could be sentenced to a lengthy prison term. But the idea that we don't send spies back to their home country in the United States of America, and we only did this for Israel, and by the way, again, these people aren't confirmed to be spies, just gotta put that out there, is absurd in every possible way. Because guess what? Cenk Uygur, of all people, has talked about how common this is, and again, not just for Israel, for countries that I guess he has to now argue control the United States government and the Obama administration, because we're talking about Russia. Again, this is a segment from the Young Turks.
What are the consequences? He says, Huffington Post explains, in addition to hitting 2 Russian intelligence agencies, 3 companies, and 4 individual intelligence officers with sanctions, banning them from travel and business with U.S. companies or individuals. Obama ordered 35 Russian operatives posted at diplomatic facilities in Washington and San Francisco to leave. So this is a pretty significant size hit. And so it's funny that we know where their operatives are, so that when we need to kick them out, they're like, okay, take the Russian spies out. Why don't we do that earlier? Partly because we also have spies in Russia that they are aware of.
Look at the difference in tone that Cenk Uygur took when it's Russia and there were 36 spies that were told to leave the United States of America, meaning that the United States government knew the whole time that those 36 individuals were in fact Russian spies, and they were counter-monitoring them, but as a punishment, as a diplomatic slap in the face to Vladimir Putin, the Obama administration didn't arrest them, didn't hold them for an exchange, didn't hold them in prison for life, just released them, and Cenk is not remotely shocked by this. The way that he talks about this is as if it's standard procedure for you to send spies back, especially when they're not actually charged with a serious crime because you don't want them in the country. And again, that's how we treated an enemy of the United States, not a nation, Israel, that is a designated ally of the United States. Again, whether you think they're a good ally or not, it makes no matter, but we treated our enemy better than Cenk is saying we should have treated the Israelis. Weird how there's a double standard whenever the topic of Israel comes up. And again, Cenk knows this. He knows this is a common practice. He understands this. He in fact laughs at it because he thinks it's goofy. But all of a sudden in Israel, with these 5 people who again were not confirmed to be spies, a little suspicious, isn't it? Let me give you a little innuendo. They're controlling our government. I don't know if you guys know this. I don't know if you guys are aware of this.
Okay, and so why? And the answer that no one can give, all they just do is huff and puff, huff and puff. Oh, you can't show that video. Don't show the video. Don't tell people what the Israelis are up to. Don't tell them that the spies were released.
Cenk, I'm not telling you not to show the video, but why don't you actually show the whole video? Why don't you show the part where the FBI confirmed at the time that there was no prior knowledge to 9/11? Like, why don't you do that? Why don't you actually give the full context? When you do quotes of Netanyahu, why don't you do the quotes in context? Or when you read them and you start making up additional things, why don't you acknowledge that you're just trying to do mind reading after the fact? Like, yeah, I'm not afraid of showing these videos. I'm not afraid of these clips. I'm not afraid of the truth, because guess what? 10 plus years ago, I went through all these conspiracies myself, and I know the novice level of knowledge you have on them and how embarrassing it is for you, who, by the way, admitted that this line of reasoning was an anti-Semitic trap years ago when it came to Ted Nugent liking Facebook comments, but now you're pushing it yourself.
Okay, well, kiss my ass. We are telling them, and we're telling them because it is about the government of Israel, and stop slandering our brothers and sisters who are Jewish Americans who had nothing to do with it. They were not part of a spy operation. Mossad didn't call them. No, this is the government of Israel.
So this is the delineation between Israel and Jews, which again, you can criticize the nation of Israel and not be anti-Semitic. That is 100% true. But considering that Cenk Uygur specifically said this type of conspiracies, the Israeli 9/11 conspiracies, are anti-Semitic and are about Jewish people, again, when it came to Ted Nugent liking Facebook comments, it's kind of weird that he and his executive producer are pushing those exact same conspiracy theories.
So last thing on the video, that when they go back to Israel and they say, one of the guys says, we were there to document the events. No one can answer, what does he mean? Yeah. How did you know there was going to be an event on 9/11?
So in case you thought I was stretching when I was pointing out that the implication is that the Israelis had prior knowledge to the 9/11 events, Cenk just comes right out and says it. And again, we already discussed we were there to document the event could have been in response to what were you doing when that woman saw you? That's how they could have interpreted the question. But Cenk never talks about that option. Instead, he goes to the conspiracy option, which is they had prior knowledge and they interpreted the question as why were you in the United States of America, or why were you in the New York area, or in this particular case in New Jersey, because that building was in New Jersey, even though there are much simpler, much more logical explanations. And it's kind of ridiculous to assume that the Israeli spies would admit prior knowledge of 9/11 on the Israeli news.
How did you know to pull the van up before the towers were hit? To take the pictures and the video? Why were you celebrating? But forget the celebration. I don't care. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. What I want to know is, How did you know? How did you know there was going to be an event?
So Cenk's like, oh, well, how were they there? How did they know to park there before the towers were hit? Why were they there? Why were they there? How did they know to park there? Really emphasizing the point of prior knowledge, even though the witness that they were talking about with the binoculars actually saw them at around 9 o'clock, according to her account, which is after the first tower was hit. And depending on how far, since the second tower was hit at, I believe, 9:03 a.m., it could have been after the second tower was hit. But there is a reason why these individuals were there. Remember, even if you think it was an intelligence front, at the time they were doing a job in that very building. But you might ask, why park there of all the other places to park in and around that area where you happen to have a perfect view of the towers? I mean, isn't that suspicious? Isn't that unusual? Isn't that weird? Isn't that something that definitely we should latch on to? Well, no, because I've actually seen the building. Here's a photo of it. And as you can see from this photo, the Israelis were parked in the parking lot of the building that they were doing a job in.
How did you know to pull the van up before the towers were hit?
So the reason the car was there, the reason they decided to choose that place to park, is because that was the parking lot. The building that they were supposed to do the job in, that's the parking lot for the building. You could see in the photo, that's the parking lot, that's where you park. So the reason why their car was parked where it was parked is because that was the parking lot at the place that they were going to. That's why they were there. In case you were wondering, Cenk, in case you needed to break this down. And again, lots of people filmed the 9/11 attacks after the first plane hit, like, by the way, the FBI says they did at this particular situation. So the idea that we're going to adjudicate why every one of their cars was parked where they were parked is absurd, especially when you say it as I'm saying it, rather than Cenk saying, how did they know? How did they know to park there? It's because they had a reason to be in that building, and that was the parking lot, Cenk. He's like, but why was their car there? Because that was the parking lot. That's why they were there, Cenk. It's not hard to figure out.
How did you know to pull the van up before the towers were hit?
Now, to be clear, this location was only a couple of minutes away from the company that these guys worked at, which was like the urban moving company, and they said that they drove there after the first plane was hit in order to get a better view. In addition to that, the FBI has actually corroborated this, saying that according to radar, this van arrived there at 8:50, which was after the first tower was hit, but prior to the second tower being hit. So when Cenk says, how did they know to be there before? What he's actually saying is that he didn't read the documents and he wants to make things up. In addition to that, I will also point out that Cenk grew up in the state of New Jersey, and as a New Yorker, who by the way has family in New Jersey and has friends in New Jersey, I would just like to point out something that is absolutely obvious, which is when you're just over the Hudson River, when you're in Jersey City and any of these towns that are alongside the Hudson River, guess what you have a great view of? Downtown Manhattan. Multiple people got to a location where they could have a better view with their own eyes after the first plane hit the first tower and after the second plane hit the second tower. Again, this was not the only spot in all of New Jersey or even in that area where you would have this view. It was just a better view than where they were when they heard about this. So like I said earlier on in this video, I did make an attempt to reach out to Ana Kasparian to clarify whether or not she is standing by the allegations or allegations,
false allegations and not facts,
that all 5 of these people were confirmed to be spies. And what I ended up receiving back was an article from somebody who's kind of from a pro-Israeli perspective that essentially makes the case that according to the feds, at least 2 of these individuals showed up in a known intelligence operatives database. Now, the thing is, this is a far cry from the confirmed 5 of them are all spies that Cenk Uygur was spouting out in his particular video. It represents a significant backpedal, and to me, this doesn't really change any of the content of the coverage that I've done so far, because I actually don't think it's crazy for you to believe that these are possible Israeli spies or Mossad agents. The fact is, I take issue with you saying it's confirmed when it's anything but. And again, even if you say 2 were confirmed behind the scenes according to these FBI officials or whatever, that is still a far cry from saying that all 5 were confirmed, and of course, the implications of prior knowledge of the attack. attacks. Now, the second thing that I requested clarity from Ana Kasparian is, of course, this idea that the Israelis admitted to or implied prior knowledge on the Israeli TV interview in the statement that was translated to English that ended up coming off as "we were there documenting the events" or "we were there to document the events."
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Now, the way I had this question posed to Ana Kasparian played on the fact that Ana is a speaker of at least 2 languages. And by the way, Cenk Uygur also speaks 2 languages as well. Ana speaks Armenian and English, Cenk speaks Turkish and English, and they should know, as people who speak multiple languages, that when you translate something into English and it is a direct translation, oftentimes what ultimately ends up coming up is something that would never be phrased that exact way in the English language. And of course, there were viral videos back in the day of people putting "Let It Go," the Frozen lyrics, into Google Translate, then translating it back to English and then singing it to demonstrate this difference. So I wanted to know and I wanted to understand the thought process behind posting this or talking about this in such a way that doesn't take that into account. In addition to that, I also highlighted the fact that this Israeli talk show was in front of a live studio audience, and you would think that if you had people admitting to prior knowledge of the September 11th attacks, that you would actually hear an audible gasp or some kind of reaction from the crowd or from the talk show hosts to this stunning admission, unless of course you are under the impression that everybody in Israel, including the live studio audience, is aware of the fact that Israel had this prior knowledge that is being implied and or alleged by the way that people cover this story. It would seem rather absurd that you wouldn't get any reaction. Now, for me, the idea that Mossad agents would go on Israeli television and admit to prior knowledge of the 9/11 attacks is absurd on its own. But in addition to that, the idea that there would be no reaction from the crowd would also be absurd. So obviously, what I believe happened in this particular interview is that something was translated into English that sounds far more sinister in English, but is actually rather benign in the original language that was spoken. I used the context clues around it in order to draw that conclusion. And unfortunately, despite me pressing this issue, despite me leaning on the fact that, again, I'm speaking to somebody or communicating with somebody who also speaks 2 languages and should know this, I did not receive a response to this prompt. First question, got an answer right off the top. This question, end of discussion, essentially, which is unfortunate because it's been about a day and a half since I put in those questions for answers.
Their whole effort is to, let's just keep it real. They're just trying to intimidate me, right? And a lot of people, I get it. I understand why they would fall victim to that intimidation and they would maybe back off of these stories and not cover them and not talk about them.
And by the way, I will also add that Ana ends up going on this whole rant about how she's not gonna tolerate all these different various people who are more concerned with the foreign country than the United States of America. I'll play a little bit of that for you right here.
And I'm not gonna be intimidated by someone who has far more concern with a foreign country as opposed to our country here in America. I'm an American, I'm gonna look out for America.
And look, while I 100% agree that Americans should put the United States of America over not just Israel, but every other country in the world, let's be real about what's going on. Ana started pushing this stuff publicly when people started sending her videos of people in the West Bank unambiguously celebrating 9/11. So what Ana's actually doing, because she's so blinded by disdain for the nation of Israel, is putting the Palestinians above the United States of America, above truth, and above her ethical obligations to actually look into and seek out the explanations for the stories that she presents on her program. She's just running with the dancing Israeli conspiracy, not bringing in any countervailing information.
You literally have Netanyahu saying 9/11 was the best thing to happen to Israel.
That's on the record, you're right. He did say that. Netanyahu said on the record that 9/11 was good for Israel.
So
How are they our allies? Someone please explain that to me. People, I love when Israel defenders bring this up as if it's like something I made up or pulled out of my ass.
What?
Even though there's FBI documents about it, there's Fox News channel reporting on it. I mean, they tried to wipe the internet, but it's still available in the archives. There's ABC News video of it.
Of what?
The whole dancing Israelis thing.
Oh.
Right? The woman who witnessed it and called the authorities, she is on the record. She's in an ABC News report where she's talking about what she witnessed, what she saw. Then you have these, I believe it was 7 Israelis who are, after being detained for a few months, sent back to Israel. They do media interviews, and they're like, we were just there to document the events.
Yeah,
what the does that mean?
Right.
Now, Anna should be fully aware of what the impact is of pinning 9/11 on a certain group of people and what the reaction from her audience would be to that information. And I can assume if she is aware of that, then that is her intentional reaction. And I find that to be absolutely disgusting. And again, considering that Anna, again, when I asked for clarification on this stuff, volunteered that she doesn't believe that there is enough evidence to say that Israel was behind 9/11, I find it even more disturbing, because if you're leading people on this trail of breadcrumbs to a conclusion that they're obviously going to draw based on what you are saying is true and indisputable, and then you don't actually believe the conclusion that going to draw from this information, I think it is highly irresponsible to not at least clarify your position publicly. And again, considering it is in response to somebody showing, originally at least, the Palestinians celebrating this, and she had a visceral reaction to that, because essentially a lot of people will use a clip like that to justify any kind of wrongdoing to the Palestinians, which is why I don't want to post clips like that just randomly. She should get the implications of that and not want to do it herself, but instead she just goes full force on this. Now, Anna goes on another podcast that I had never heard of called the Habibi House podcast, where she doubles down on the dancing Israeli things, talks about the FBI documents and how they're trying to scrub this from the internet. And to be clear, they did remove a lot of this information from YouTube specifically and other social medias when they did the conspiracy theory crackdown, when they banned Alex Jones, if you guys remember that whole wave of the internet. And I don't want to tread the same water, but Anna says she read the FBI documents, but whatever, that's neither here nor there at this point in time, because she's going to go on to talk other anti-Israeli conspiracies that I think need to be addressed.
Me too.
Yeah.
And 9/11?
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
Yeah.
It was them Arabs.
Well, look, 9/11.
They
9/11. I am curious what you guys think about it, because I'm not convinced that Israel
controlled
was
demolition.
behind.
I don't know about Israel, but it's
if you
it's
literally
a controlled
have,
demolition.
Yeah, you look at the videos and it's definitely
3 buildings.
suspicious. Yeah.
So of course you have this other guy bring up the controlled demolition theory, and again, all of this is to obfuscate responsibility from Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, who took responsibility for this attack. And I feel like I'm talking to a 22-year-old version of myself, so I want to say, hey, don't be a dumbass. Don't start talking about architecture and all these things that you don't understand like you're an expert. But Anna, who's older than I am, is just kind of nodding along and agreeing with this.
The facts of 9/11 and like the buildings falling and like the building behind
7?
Building behind them saying,
Just
it
fell
fell,
over,
but then it didn't fall yet, and like
So let me understand something.
and then the guy didn't go to work and he said pull it.
So Anna and these guys talk about 7 WTC, which again, if you're somebody who's like getting into the conspiracies around September 11th, this I can understand hanging on to the absolute longest, because the explanations for it are not as quick and easy to understand as the other debunkings as I've seen. And I don't want to just hate on them for buying into conspiracy theories, because in reality, a lot of people buy into conspiracy theories. But then they move on to the insurance conspiracy related to 9/11, and it's first stated by one of the hosts and then repeated by Anna as something incredibly suspicious.
And like all these
there was the
insurance
insurance policy.
Exactly.
Yeah, like just that is sketchy.
Or
And it's like
conspiracy theorists, guys.
no, it's not even the conspiracy.
Now, look, I understand buying into the insurance conspiracy or the insurance fraud conspiracy theory when you first hear about it and you are not familiar at all whatsoever with the subject matter, much in the same way that I was when I was 19 years old and I first stumbled across this portion of the conspiracy theory. That being said, Ana Kasparian teaches journalism at a university, and she's also the executive producer over at the Young Turks, so you would think think that she would do basic fact checking before uttering something related to the insurance policy scheme, which, by the way, is maybe one of the dumbest propositions ever related to 9/11 truthism, or whatever you want to call it. Because if you guys are not aware, this all stems from the idea that Larry Silverstein, he was the president of the World Trade Center organization, which of course governed the complex to which the Twin Towers were a part of. And as a part of being the president, he ended up getting insurance for this entire complex. And as a part of that insurance, there was a provision in that policy that said if the World Trade Center was hit by a terror attack, then the damage that would be paid by the insurance company would be double what would be paid if it were like damaged by a natural disaster or something of the sort. So people took that and ran with it. They said that was insanely suspicious. How did Larry Silverstein know that there was going to be a terror attack there? Why would that provision exist in that insurance policy? That's suspicious. That's weird. And for Ana Kasparian, apparently 20 something years after 9/11, that's as far as she thought about that issue. But the thing is, there's an obvious reason why that provision would be in the insurance policy, because the World Trade Center, and specifically the Twin Towers, were already hit by a terror attack 8 years before 9/11. Muslims did it again back then, if you guys are not aware, where somebody parked a truck full of explosives near what they thought was a support beam that, if you hit it hard enough, would cause the towers to tip over into each other and collapse onto the streets of Manhattan. This is a well-documented thing. Everybody knows about it. And in reality, a lot of the literature that conspiracy theorists glob onto that has imagery of the Twin Towers post 93 but pre 9/11 was based on the fact that it was already targeted by a terror attack. In addition to that, financial centers have been historic targets of terror attacks, and I believe other World Trade Center complexes around the world had also been attacked or had high-profile instances. So while initially, when you hear this, you might find it suspicious that this place had an insurance policy that specifically related to terrorism pre-9/11, but in reality, financial centers are often targets of terror attacks. World Trade Center complexes around the world have had major security concerns, and of course, the Twin Towers had already been targeted by a terror attack 8 years prior to 9/11. So in reality, they're saying, wow, that's so suspicious, but 2 seconds of Googling will tell you this was the most likely place for an attack to happen. In fact, it had already happened there. Everybody was concerned about it. And by the way, one of the reasons why you would have provisions that would double up for the damage is because after an attack happens, typically people want to relocate their businesses out of the most likely place to be attacked. So you have to compensate them beyond the physical damage to the building for other associated costs for people abandoning the World Trade Center, rents dropping, revenues dropping from the premises. So yes, it makes perfect sense to get this policy. Larry Silverstein would have been an absolute idiot for not getting a policy like this. And in addition to that, when you take over large buildings in the city of New York, you're obligated by law to do so. So everything about this, oh, the insurance policy, why would you get terrorism insurance for the most likely place to get hit by a terror attack that had already been hit by a terror attack, is nonsense. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, and again, it's something that you can get around, you can debunk. If you're actually looking for answers, not trying to blame somebody else for these attacks, then you could figure it out in 2 seconds of Googling. Now look, I get the game that they're playing where you project whatever is being thrown at the Muslims or at the Palestinians against Israel and the Jews, but do a little better than insurance fraud, Larry Silverstein, pull the building, and all this other nonsense that, again, you could shut down in 3 seconds if you just think. If you just remember that the 93 WTC attack happened, you would never utter these stupid, ridiculous sentences. And when somebody did, you would bring up that obvious fact. But then they're going to get into the John F. Kennedy thing.
And then, Kennedy tries to register APAC as a foreign agent.
Mm-hmm.
Mysteriously gets...
Just mysteriously, yeah. No, I totally believe the cover story of how he got assassinated.
Yeah.
Now look, to be clear, there are plenty of John F. Kennedy conspiracy theories. I've heard the mafia conspiracy. I've heard the theory of Kennedy signing that executive order to have a silver-backed currency, and agents of the Federal Reserve taking him out, the CIA, all these different various groups that are supposedly behind this. And again, I want to get into the Kennedy stuff at some point in time in my life because I do find it to be incredibly interesting and the conspiracy culture around it to be incredibly interesting. However, as somebody who used to argue argue that Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't possibly make that shot from the book depository, and then someone who visited Dealey Plaza, where this went down, saw where the motorcade is, which is marked on the ground, and where the shot came from, I realized that, yeah, a lot of the conspiracies about that in particular are stupid in every possible way. I felt like if I was in the book suppository and you gave me a baseball, I could throw it at John F. Kennedy from how close it was. That whole area is significantly smaller than I imagined in all the movies and whatnot and all the films that you've seen. So again, I'm not going to ding you too much for having a conspiracy theory related to the event that has prompted the greatest amount of conspiracy theories in American history. That being said, I also want to point out that this is also an instance of projection, because we know for a fact that Sirhan murdered Robert F. Kennedy Jr. a couple of years later, and Sirhan is a Palestinian. He was somebody who was displaced in the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, became a refugee, came to the United States of America, and killed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in part because he thought that RFK Jr. would be too pro-Israel. So yeah, that is considered a contributing factor to why he killed RFK Jr., but once again, when we have a clear-cut case of Palestinians doing something, self-identified Palestinians, we gotta get a version of it that kind of blames Israel. That's what it feels like we're getting right here. But again, it's all about projection.
9/11?
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
Yeah.
It was them Arabs.
You have this guy sarcastically saying Arabs did 9/11 when the hijackers were overwhelmingly Saudi, which means they're from Arabia. So he throws it on the Jews must have done it. We have unambiguous video evidence of people in the Palestinian territory celebrating 9/11. Oh, well, actually, what about the Israelis that were reportedly dancing in New Jersey? All these different terror groups and governments that attack Israel have genocide of the Jews in their charter. Well, guess what? We accuse Israel a couple days after October 7th of doing a genocide against the Palestinians. It's all projection, it's all transparent, anybody can see what's going on here, and yet we're supposed to pretend like this is a normal conversation. Now look, I'm gonna link all my sources and of course the original videos in the description of this video for you to check it out for yourself, but one of the things that I was curious about was what would be the reaction from the anti-Israel left wing to Ana Kasparian putting this stuff out there, because honestly a lot of these conspiracy theories are very popular among the anti-Israel right wing, and you will be shocked to discover that Lance from the Serfs, of all people, a guy who can't stand Israel, opened up his video with like a 5-minute explanation of how he hates the nation, hates everything about it. Even he found this to be a bridge too far. Even Lance from the Serfs, who I've called the dumbest person on the internet.com, the most bad faith individual out there, somebody that I never thought would be right about any issue, was like, whoa, Anna, this is a little bit too crazy.
Oh, they're doing 9/11 trutherism. I mean, they're doing it playfully. You can grant them that. It's just more just kind of like, I just don't know if we know the full story. Right? Yeah. What do you mean? The buildings, the controlled demolition aspect seems realistic, right? Like, why wouldn't it make sense? I don't know if you saw, but like in some of the footage, there's like what looks to be like dust and exhaust coming from the windows as they collapse. That could indicate that those were bombs going off. The buildings do go down in a very controlled demolition way. We've never seen it before, where like an airplane hits a building and then the building just like completely collapses. That's kind of interesting. And then we can add motives to it, right? Like who stood to benefit from the potential for such an attack on the United States, and why would they do such a thing, and who would have the allowability and access? Like, I'm one of the biggest critics of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he is a disgusting ass war criminal who should spend his remaining days in a prison cell. And honestly, the crimes of Israel have gone on for so long and been so pacified by the United States that there is an enormous amount of war criminals along the way who should stand trial. And there should be an absolute, not only right of return for Palestinians and them to have full emancipation, but there should be reparations, there should be rebuilding efforts. It should go so far beyond simply ending this apartheid and this nation state that is effectively destroying and occupying and murdering and genociding Palestinians. That doesn't mean that they did 9/11. The are we doing here? Why would you do this?
So yeah, Anna, bad job all the way around. And honestly, and I know people are going to roast me in the comments for this, I actually expected better from you. This is a complete regression back to your old ways, and now you're covering some dark territory. And the thing is, I knew 100% that Anna was anti-Israel. Like, that's what the Young Turks have dedicated half of their programming to since October 7th. However, that didn't really bother me because I never wanted to make my breaking point with somebody who, again, is moving in a positive direction on a bunch of other issues, a foreign country or a foreign conflict. So yeah, it's not like I've been making all these different videos and whatnot attacking Anna over that. I just figured, you know, this is something that we're going to disagree on. This is something that she cares passionately about. So I'm not going to be like super harsh when she says things that are borderline or crazy, but this is beyond the pale. And again, beyond what I expected. Roast me in the comments for not seeing this coming all the way, and roast me again for getting these messages like a month to 2 months ago and not really thinking they were all this serious, because I thought that people were just kind of overhyping the anti-Israel conspiracy element or the anti-Jew conspiracy element. But in reality, I mean, the proof in the pudding is in the taste, and it turns out the taste has been constructed by the Mossad, apparently. I don't know. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Anna embracing the Israelis did 9/11 conspiracy. Never thought I'd say that sentence. Till next time.